Picture this. You turn on the news and discover the Supreme Court just delivered a decision that every single justice agreed on. All 9 of them, no exceptions. This wasn't just any ruling. Legal experts are saying this case will fundamentally change how we understand and apply the Constitution in America. This is real. This actually happened. And right now, the entire country is trying to figure out what comes next. The Supreme Court just made a move that has sent ripples through Washington, D.C., affecting the White House, both chambers of Congress, and, honestly, every American citizen. We're going to walk through exactly what took place, explain what it means for your rights under the Constitution, and discuss why this particular decision might alter the relationship between government authority and individual freedom for generations to come. Before we get into the details, I need you to do something really quick. Smash that like button right now if you care about protecting your Second Amendment rights. It only takes a second, and it makes a huge difference in getting this information out to more people who need it. Also, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future updates on your rights. Trust me, you're going to want to stay informed about this stuff. So, what actually went down? The Supreme Court delivered a unanimous decision in a case that initially appeared to be just another constitutional dispute. But as the case progressed, it became clear this was going to be one of the most important rulings in recent American history. At the center of this case was a question that courts have been wrestling with for years. Can the federal government ignore or work around fundamental constitutional protections when it claims something is in the national interest? For a long time, lower courts had been giving the government a pass on this. They allowed various federal agencies and executive departments to push constitutional boundaries, justifying it with vague references to emergency powers. But the Supreme Court just put a stop to that. And they didn't do it with a narrow majority. Every single justice, whether they were appointed by Republican or Democratic presidents, came together and delivered the same message. The Constitution says what it says. The Bill of Rights isn't something that can be rewritten through executive orders. That's what this case boils down to. A clear, powerful statement from the nation's highest court. Legal scholars are already calling this a constitutional earthquake, and it's not hard to see why. The case began when an ordinary citizen decided to challenge the federal government for what they believed was government overreach using emergency authority as justification. The person who brought this case argued that a federal agency had used these emergency powers to enforce actions that directly violated several amendments in the Constitution, particularly the First, Fourth, and 10th Amendments. The government's position was that constitutional protections could be put on hold temporarily during times of crisis. The Supreme Court justices were not buying that argument. Even during the oral arguments before the final decision, you could see that this wasn't going to end well for the government's case. Justices who normally tend to give the government the benefit of the doubt were asking tough questions. Justice Gorsuch asked a straightforward question that cut right to the heart of the matter. When does an emergency actually end, and when does the Constitution start applying again? Justice Kagan made an equally powerful point, stating that we cannot have a constitution that only works when it's convenient for those in power. Justice Thomas, known for his direct approach, made it crystal clear where he stood. He pointed out that the rights protected by the Constitution aren't gifts or privileges handed out by the government. They're restrictions on what the government is allowed to do. When people heard these questions and statements during the oral arguments, it became obvious that this decision wasn't going to be split along ideological lines. Then the decision came out, and it was stunning. 9-0. Every justice voted the same way. Not one dissenting opinion. The court ruled that the federal government does not have constitutional authority to suspend rights or change the meaning of constitutional amendments just because there's an emergency, unless Congress specifically authorizes it, and even then, it has to meet very strict constitutional standards. The main opinion was written by Chief Justice Roberts, and one line from it is already being repeated everywhere. He wrote that the Constitution wasn't designed for peaceful times. It was designed for turbulent times. That single sentence is now being quoted in law school classrooms, in news discussions, and on the floor of Congress. The decision reinforced something that many people feel America has been moving away from. The Constitution is not something that applies only when convenient. The government doesn't get to pick which parts to follow and which parts to ignore. No crisis, whether it's a war, a pandemic, or any policy emergency, can eliminate the rights that belong to the people. The impact of this ruling is already being felt everywhere. Within hours of the announcement, lawyers across the nation started filing new legal challenges against long-standing executive powers and the authority claimed by various federal agencies. Lawsuits are already being filed against the Department of Justice regarding certain surveillance programs, against the ATF concerning enforcement actions based on regulatory rules rather than laws, and against federal health agencies over mandates that may have crossed constitutional lines. People who analyze politics for a living are saying this represents the biggest limitation on executive power since the time of Nixon. Even news outlets that typically support expanded federal authority have had to acknowledge that this ruling changes everything. You can sense the concern in the nation's capital. The federal bureaucracy has gotten used to operating in areas where the rules weren't entirely clear. The Supreme Court just drew a clear boundary line across the Constitution and sent a message that crossing that line will have consequences. Let's dig deeper into what this means beyond just the news headlines. This case wasn't about one specific agency, one particular power, or even one individual citizen. This was about the fundamental structure of how our republic operates, and the court just issued a reminder that America is supposed to be governed by laws, not by the preferences of whoever happens to be in charge. This ruling sends a message to every part of the government. The executive branch cannot ignore the Constitution by claiming something is necessary or urgent. The legislative branch cannot hand over unconstitutional powers to federal agencies and claim its efficient governance. And the judicial branch has an obligation to strike down any law or executive order that violates the Bill of Rights, regardless of who signed it or what justification they provide. Justice Alito wrote a separate opinion agreeing with the decision, and his words captured the spirit of the ruling perfectly. He acknowledged that a crisis might require action, but taking action that violates the Constitution isn't actually solving the problem. It's giving up on our principles. That sentiment runs throughout this entire decision. It's bold, it's clear, and it's historic. Americans are responding to this news in different ways. Constitutional scholars and people who advocate for individual liberty are celebrating this as a return to the original meaning of the Constitution and a victory for every citizen who believes government should serve the people rather than control them. On the flip side, federal agencies and those who defend bureaucratic power are worried, warning that this ruling will make it harder for the government to respond flexibly in future emergencies. But here's the thing. That's exactly what the ruling is supposed to do. Freedom isn't meant to make things easy for government. It's meant to make tyranny difficult. And that's precisely what this 9-0 decision restores. It brings back accountability, transparency, and clear constitutional limits. You might be wondering why it has happened now. Why would justices appointed by different presidents with different judicial philosophies all agree on this? The answer is that at its core, this case wasn't about politics. It was about something more fundamental. If one administration can bend the Constitution to fit what it wants to do, then the next administration can do the same thing. And that's dangerous for every citizen, regardless of which political party you support, what you believe, or where you come from. This unanimous decision shows that, at least in this moment, the Supreme Court recognizes that protecting the basic structure of the Constitution is more important than political considerations. It's a reminder that rights only have real meaning when they're defended during difficult times. Now let's talk about what happens moving forward, because this isn't just symbolic language. This decision has real consequences. Federal judges are already citing this case when they roll on new constitutional challenges. State governments are pointing to this decision as they push back against federal mandates. Individual citizens are filing lawsuits in situations where they believe federal agencies crossed constitutional boundaries. This decision could also reshape federalism, which is the balance of power between the federal government and state governments. It might shift authority back towards states and individual citizens. It could even become the legal precedent that limits what people call the administrative state, forcing agencies like the EPA, ATF, and DOJ to justify every rule they want to enforce by showing it's actually supported by the text of the Constitution. That's where real change begins. When you remove excessive bureaucracy and bring government back under constitutional limits, that's when individual freedom grows. Historians are already comparing this decision to landmark Supreme Court cases that fundamentally shaped American law. Cases like Marbury v. Madison, Brown v. Board of Education, and District of Columbia v. Heller. This 9-0 decision belongs on that list, not because of what policy it creates, but because it reasserts a fundamental truth that many people in positions of power seem to have forgotten. The Constitution doesn't belong to politicians. It belongs to the people. That quote comes from Justice Barrett in her opinion agreeing with the decision, and it might just define this generation's understanding of constitutional law. 20 years from now, 50 years from now, maybe even 100 years from now, people will look back at this case as the moment when the Supreme Court reminded America of something simple but incredibly important. Our freedoms aren't given to us by the government. They're protected from government overreach. So, what should you take away from all this? When the Supreme Court speaks with complete unity and says that the Constitution cannot be rewritten through executive action, the message is unmistakable. Freedom still has defenders in high places. The people still have power in this system. And the Constitution still stands as the foundation of American law. This decision won't solve every problem in Washington immediately, but it plants a flag right in the middle of ongoing debates, declaring that the rule of law still matters. As this case influences decisions in other courts, affects debates in Congress, and impacts policies in state governments, there will be resistance. There will be pushback. But for this moment, freedom just won an important victory. So pay attention to what happens next. Keep learning about these issues. And most importantly, remember that every right you have was written down permanently, not as something temporary that can be erased when convenient. Because once freedom is taken away, getting it back is incredibly difficult. The country was built on principles of individual liberty protected by constitutional limits on government power, and it will only remain that way if people continue to understand and defend those principles. If you found this information valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps get this critical information in front of more gun owners who need to know about these changes. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on your rights. Share this video with every gun owner you know because this information is too important to keep to yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.